is the most potent GnRH product. We also have products like Coriolan and PMSG as well in other species. In terms of the vaccines for fertility, we have a presence with Bovolus BBD, Bovolus IBR marker, Leptovoid and Bovivac S for the prevention of leptospirosis and salmonella in cattle. And finally, we also, with the acquisition of a technology company in 2019, are now the major player in fertility and health monitors in cattle. And we'll hear later on about Vet Consult, which is an application that's been developed for vet practices where we take the information from the monitoring technology, combine that with data from the ICBF, the milk recording data, so that you have access to that information for your herds. And at this stage, I'll hand you over to Michelle.
Thank you, Fergal. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. It's great to see such big numbers out tonight, and we realise it's a busy time of the year. But it's hard to believe that from 3 weeks next Monday, most spring calving herds will begin their breeding season of 2023. A few housekeeping issues for tonight, so that we have a chat function, and we would be delighted if you would put in whatever questions you have and put them in throughout the presentations. We have 4 presentations, all from industry experts. But we're going to start tonight, and we're delighted to be joined by Dr. Finbar Mulligan. Dr. Finbar Mulligan is going to speak about nutrition and management for a successful breeding season. He is, as you know, an associate professor of animal nutrition in the School of Veterinary Medicine, UCD. Thank you, Finbar.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Michelle. Can I just ask, is the view okay there, Michelle, before I begin? And can you hear me okay?
Both are perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Michelle. And just before I begin, I just want to thank the hosts, MSD, for inviting me to come along and speak to you this evening. It's always a pleasure to get to speak to groups of veterinarians on the area of dairy cow nutrition. So there are a number of things that I'm going to consider this evening. One of the first ones is just to recap, I suppose, as to why fertility is so important. And really, you know, fertility is one of the key things from the point of view of farmer profitability. And of course, financial profitability and financial sustainability is one of the first and most important aspects of sustainability, full stop. So when we look at, I suppose, what's happening and our current performance nationally with regard to fertility, we see from the ICBF dairy statistics that our average 6-week calving down rate is approximately 65%. Now, the target 6-week calving down rate is about 90%. And Teagasc, you know, from time to time estimate, you know, how much it costs us to miss fertility targets. And quite simply, it's about €8 per cow for every % that you're below that target. So if we look at the national fertility performance, then you know, the cost over national performance compared to target is about €20,000 for 100 dairy cows. And that is certainly significant. So good fertility is key for farmer profitability. Farmers know that very well. You guys know that very well. And there has been a lot of attention put on improving fertility in our cattle herds, and rightly so. So it's also amazing the way that time has moved on, you know, and in terms of what we should expect from a well-run dairy herd with regard to good fertility performance. And I'm basing this, you know, kind of on targets that might be out there, as it were, but also on, you know, what I would believe would be important, what I would believe would be achievable, working with high EBI cows at Lyons Farm. So submission rates more than 90% in the first 3 weeks. Conception rates certainly should be more than 60%, you know, in cows with good fertility sub-index. 6-week in calf rate in the milking herd, and I stress that's in the milking herd, more than 75%. And empty rates of less than 10%. And, you know, certainly that is achievable. It's achievable even in, you know, what I would consider like a 10-week breeding season, that would be all AI. And then, you know, the following year, you know, hopefully with good heifer fertility and maiden heifers, a 6-week calving down rate of 90%. And of course, a calving interval of 365 days. So it's really important, in my opinion, to, you know, to keep calibrated in terms of what the targets are. I think we may have had different acceptable levels of fertility 20 years ago, but certainly the way things have moved for the better with regard to dairy cow genetics and fertility targets should move on with the times, and we should look for good fertility performance as outlined. One of the things that we need to consider, you know, when we're talking tonight about nutrition and fertility, it's very important to consider, you know, that fertility, you know, it's certainly much more than a three-legged stool. And I would say that for good fertility performance, and I've been lucky enough, you know, to work in the School of Veterinary Medicine and to investigate many cases of poor fertility over the years. And from that, you know, I would have the view that it's important that many arrows need to point in the right direction for good fertility. So tonight, fair enough, you know, we will focus on nutrition here. That's the topic, you know, that we're going to consider. But there's a lot of other things, you know, as well. And obviously, good nutrition has a big role to play in successful calving, and management and nutrition are often linked as well. You know, there's no point having a good plan for a diet if you don't end up feeding that diet. But other things are hugely important. You know, genetics, infectious disease, lameness are all important. And management of the actual nuts and bolts of the breeding season. Things like heat detection, keeping cow lists, you know, efficient pre-breeding management and pre-breeding and veterinary involvement are all absolutely key for a good fertility performance. So some of the things then that I was going to discuss tonight, number one, you know, successful calving. Then I was going to look at nutrition, energy status, and early lactation. And certainly, you know, in the Irish scenario, that this is quite important. And certainly, you know, there are challenges there that come up from time to time. And then minerals and trace elements. I was going to make some comment about minerals and trace elements as well. So the first thing, I suppose, for a successful breeding season, you really do need to have a successful calving season. And nutrition is, you know, an important risk factor for many conditions that might happen through the calving season. So good nutrition, you know, can help to really prevent a lot of these problems from happening. And poor nutrition and poor management then will create a risk. And what we know about these, what we might just loosely term transition cow disorders, is that they don't happen without consequence. And this is some data from the UK. And you can see here, you know, one of the disorders that we might consider retained fetal membranes, that certainly adds a significant amount of days to the days from calving to the day of pregnancy. And in that particular estimate, maybe as many as 20 days added from retained fetal membranes. But you can see as well that other transition cow disorders also have a negative impact on time until pregnancy. For example, milk fever, low body condition score, etc., all have a negative impact on the number of days from calving to pregnancy. So it's important for a successful breeding season, you know, we really do need to have a successful calving season. And, you know, I think Michelle mentioned earlier on, you know, 3 weeks from today, you know, an awful lot of dairy farmers will start their breeding season. You know, it's absolutely critical, and kind of the way I look at it from being involved in the dairy herd at Lyons Farm is that every cow, you know, is cycling. Every cow is fit and healthy, you know, on day one, on mating start date, if you like, to give them a good chance of going back and calf. So I think a good calving season is essential. And just like our targets for fertility have moved on, maybe our targets for what we would consider a good calving season might have moved on as well. And you can see here, you know, I've kind of put up some thresholds that might be used to rank the calving season as excellent. You know, in green, maybe an amber light then for, you know, where you'd have to review your controls, and then a red light where action would be needed. But certainly in terms of excellent, you know, retained placenta less than 5%, milk fever less than 3%, displacements at 0, you know, that should be achievable in the best herds. And by the way, that should be achievable year in, year out. And then, you know, where action is needed, you know, retained placenta more than 10%, certainly milk fever more than 5%, displacements more than 3%. You know, I think it's certainly possible to do much better than that. So we're past the planning stage, if you like, for the transition cow diet now. I suppose things to check on, you know, if things have gone wrong, you know, was body condition score on target, and was the energy allowance correct? So, you know, that's extremely important. Was the mineral feeding plan appropriate? Was the mineral feeding effective? So did things at farm level mean that the mineral feeding plan was actually carried out? Are there issues on the farm with feed space? On many farms there are. We have certainly seen at Lyons Farm, at our own farm, that if we're tight on feed space, that we see quite big disparities in BCS. And we think the reason is that maybe aggressive cows get high in BCS where there are issues with feed space, and timid cows tend to do worse. Did the silage change? So was the dry cow silage the same as what the diet is planned for? Or did the dry cow silage change maybe to pit 2 or another pit on the farm on the 15th of February? Were there risks with the silage? Was it high in potassium? Was the husbandry and stockmanship at calving ideal? So this is actually assisting cows calving. And was the husbandry in the calving or colostrum pen? So immediately post-calving, was the husbandry of the cow at that point ideal? So these are all things I think that can be considered, and they're certainly things that we would consider if we were looking at problems that occurred in terms of transition cow disorders. In early lactation then, and you know, we're at the end of March now, and this is a photograph from a group of cows at Lyons Farm just taken on Monday of this week. And you know, you're looking at these cows hoping that they're starting to improve in conditions. Some of them, you can see them visibly that they're starting to change their coat. And, you know, you're hoping that if they get a couple of weeks of good grazing conditions, that they'll be in good condition with good coats on them, with plenty of bulling activity before breeding starts. But from a nutritional point of view, you know, what we're focused on at Lyons Farm, and what I always focus on, is the energy status of the cow at this time. And I think it's extremely important to feed them a sufficient and an adequate allowance of energy. That means, you know, what you want to do is calculate or estimate the amount of energy they need, and supplement them accordingly. And what I mean supplement them accordingly means supplement them according to what they actually need, not according to what the farmer down the road is supplementing, or what you read in the media. Supplement the cow according to what they actually need. And very important in our country, where grass silage is the predominant winter forage, is to make good quality silage. So in early lactation, you know, there's a classical kind of a negative energy balance in early lactation, and that happens in early lactation because the cow's energy requirements peak quite quickly. But the feed intake, the energy ingested, peaks in a very slow manner. It takes a long time for that to hit peak. And in the meantime, you have what somebody decided to call, and quite a good term in my opinion, unavoidable underfeeding. So it's unavoidable. So there's a few weeks at the very start that you can't really avoid this underfeeding. But it's very important to minimize it because this underfeeding, it leads to body condition score loss. So we want to make it marginal. We don't want to have underfeeding in the early lactation severe. And we certainly want to shorten the duration of underfeeding. We want to make sure that it applies for the lowest number of days possible in early lactation. The other thing that we have to consider then in a grazing system, and this is in my opinion, in comparison to other confined dairy production systems, grazing cows have low energy allowances offered by circumstance or design an awful lot of the time. In dairy production in many areas of the world, you know, cows are fed ad libitum, and, you know, that's as simple as that, or they're given feed or not, feed is not withheld. In Ireland, you know, either by accident or by design, sometimes our cows aren't offered a full feed allowance. It might be because of the weather, and that's a very simple reason. We have low grass growth in the spring. It might be because the farmer is an avid grazing farmer. And, you know, in my opinion, an awful lot of farmers think, you know, once they're using the spring rotation planner, that all is good in the world of dairy cow nutrition. And that is absolutely not the case. The spring rotation planner might do a fine job on rationing out the grass in spring, but it does not absolutely tell you if the cow is fed appropriately at all. We certainly have many cases where we have medium or poor grass silage quality. In fact, the average silage quality in Ireland is only about 68 DND. And of course, there are many cases where we have a lot of advice only to offer low levels of concentrate feed. So when I think about nutrition in early lactation, you know, my goal is always to supply 100% of UFL And the goal really is to prevent body condition score loss. So you want to give the best energy allowance that you can to prevent body condition score loss. And why? Because we know that low body condition score is synonymous with poor fertility outcome. And we're very lucky that we have good data in Ireland from Teagasc to show that. And where you have low body condition score, fertility success at 6 weeks of the breeding season is much less. So what is the appropriate energy allowance? And really, you know, dairy cow nutrition should be very, very simple. And I would always, you know, have some ballpark calculations that I might do in my head. And for me, this is as you know, oftentimes this is as complicated as it gets. So what are the energy requirements of a dairy cow in early lactation? 6 UFLs for the cow, that's kind of to maintain the cow. And then if for a high EBI herd, you know, I would say about 0.47 UFLs per kilo of milk. For a crossbred herd, you know, commonly it might be Jersey to be higher fat, about 0.5 UFLs per kilo of milk. Grass, about 1 UFL I would have in my head, you know, for the concentrate, our concentrate is 1 UFL per kilo, but you can find that out of the mill. And the grass silage, you know, our UFL would be displayed on the grass silage analysis. Now, it's important to note when we talk about giving, you know, the best and an appropriate energy allowance, that the lowest time of feed intake is in week 1 and 2 after calving. And there's a number of things that can happen, you know, to cause intake to be low in week 1 and 2 after calving. But one of them is that, you know, health problems that dairy cows have around calving, they don't only have implications on reproductive outcome, they also have implications for feed consumption. And of course, this is part of the vicious circle and why we want to prevent these problems around calving time. For example, you know, your most simple calving problem, a difficult calving, perhaps caused because dairy cows had too high of a body condition score. That will reduce feed intake in early lactation by approximately 45 kilos of dry matter. And that's from the day of onset to the day of recovery. So certainly, you know, difficult calvings, retained cleanings, and milk fevers, these things will all knock feed intake and make the job of giving the cow a good energy status and all that more difficult. We also have feed factors that we need to consider. The amount offered might not be enough. The farmer might simply not be feeding enough, and maybe he's in the habit, maybe in the discussion group they're talking about feeding 4 kilos of concentrates and no one else is going above that, so the farmer doesn't want to go above that. Maybe he can't offer much grass. Maybe there's a low grass allowance. Maybe there's not much grass on the farm. Silage might be poor, or the intake characteristics of the silage might be poor. And this is a grass silage analysis that we have from Lyons Farm this year. And one of the things, you know, this silage is a 73 DMD grass silage. And one of the things that was absolutely apparent with this silage is that the intake figure was low. So that's not what you want. Now, I mean, you know, it's this year after 2022, we were feeding silage, I'd say, from mid-June in 2022 right up to the end of the year. So choice in terms of what silage we have left on the farm is not great. And maybe, you know, a lot of people might consider we're lucky to have enough silage left at all. So it's certainly something, if you have silage with a poor intake figure, you know, that is going to be important. And it's going to prevent you from giving the cow a good energy status. So we want herds to have good intake, you know, and it has been shown herds with, you know, high conception rates to forced insemination, you know, they have better intakes of dry matter and energy in the first 100 days of lactation. So what does adequate energy allowance look like? And in an Irish context, I suppose you have typical scenarios, like you'll have indoors on grass silage, you know, any cow that might calve in late January or the first half of February, or depending on the spring, that could apply to the whole of February. That was the case we saw in 2022 at Lyons. And then you might have a grass silage and graze grass diet, you know, maybe that would be called an out by day and in by night diet. And then you'd have a grazing full-time diet. And that's a typical Irish spring. You know, who knows what conditions we'll have in February and March. You know, right up until last week, we were in the shed. And by all predictions, you know, Friday is going to be an awful lot of rain. We could well be in the shed again. So you never know what the scenario will be in spring. So first of all, maybe to consider the case where the cows are in the shed. This is the indoor grass silage feeding period. And first of all, to make the point, the typical Irish cows, they're often underfed when consuming grass silage in the shed. And as well as that, feed space can also be a problem on many farms, as you well know. Now, the requirement for supplementation, and I mean nuts, will depend on silage quality and milk energy yield. It's as simple as that. And this is just a table here showing with different levels of milk production, the requirement for concentrate feed or nuts or kilos of concentrate, whatever you want to call it, for cows when they're consuming 12 kilos of grass silage dry matter. And the average DMD of Irish grass silage is 68. So if you take the line here, 70 DMD silage, that's not too far away from the average. And if you look there, you know, dairy cows producing 26, 28 kilos of milk per day. Those animals actually need 8 or 9 kilos of concentrates. And I would say, that, there's an awful lot of farms where they won't get that. And I tell you that because we have an awful lot of farmers that visit Lyons Farm. I'd say we could have 500 to 700 farmers come every year. And many of them, will tell us that they don't feed 8 kilos of concentrates at any point in the lactation cycle. So cows, need 8 or 9 kilos. That's cows producing 26, 28 kilos of milk with typical quality grass silage, 70 DMD grass silage, and many of them may not get it. On farms then that have higher output cows, they might need as much as 11 or 12 kilos of concentrate. And certainly it's the case that many of them won't get that either. So with a 70 DMD grass silage, typical Irish cows might need, 7 or 8 kilos of concentrate and possibly even more in early lactation. So they're often underfed when they're consuming a grass silage diet in the shed. If the silage feeding period is prolonged, the underfeeding is prolonged. Now, the figures we've used assume that the minimum is 12 kilos of silage dry matter intake. If you have an issue with feed space, well, then a good proportion of the herd might not even be achieving that. So that's important to take into account. And also those figures have no energy added to correct body condition score if you have a good proportion of the herd thin. So that's in the shed. The last thing I would say about feeding cows on a silage diet, grass silage is not grazed grass. And most of the time, grass silage is lower by a significant amount in energy than grazed grass. And farmers think of concentrate supplementation in terms of how much is appropriate in ideal grazing conditions. But indoors on grass silage, higher amounts are needed, and that's a fact. We move on then to grazing full time. And when we consider grazing full time, the requirement will depend on the grass intake and the milk production. And particularly, I would encourage, farmers to check their energy allowance during the time of the spring rotation planner, which generally runs maybe up until approximately the 10th of April. It differs, from one farm to another. But in this period, in any case, when we've gone grazing full time, so, a lot of people would hope that they're at that point now. The requirement for concentrate again will depend on grass intake and also the milk yield of the cow. And quite simply, in February and in March, even when you've gone grazing full time, these are the grass allowances and the grass intakes, I should say, that sometimes apply. Somewhere between 11 and 13 kilos of grass consumed. And you can see there a cow doing 26, 28 kilos of milk. They might need anywhere from 6 up to 8 kilos of supplement a day, as well as that 11 to 13 kilos of grass. And of course, many farmers have these levels of supplementation in mind, maybe from 2 to 5. And as we said before, they might be appropriate when you have a higher level of grass intake applying. And the higher yielding cows, even with good grass intakes, the higher yielding cows, they're going to need up on 8 kilos of supplement in early lactation. So be realistic and I suppose encourage farmers to do energy balance calculations to recognize the requirement for feed is high when grass intake is low. At low grass allowances, there's no problem in offering 2 to 3 kilos of silage dry matter after morning milking. Generally, silage is not as good as grass. So when you're replacing it, give a bit more of the silage. So replace 2 kilos of grass with 3 kilos of silage. If things are really good, from the 10th of April on, well then farmers should of course be encouraged to use the grass as fully as possible and save money. And because the day will come when you will need to put the feed back in. And remember as well then that higher output cows, they do need more feed to prevent body condition score loss. So an extra month in the shed, it will underfeed many Irish cows. If grass is unavailable or restricted, continue to feed for 100% of energy requirement. In my opinion, there is not enough focus on feeding cows for their energy requirement. And nearly all of the advocacy and advice that goes into nutrition of grazing cows is around looking after the grass in spring. In my opinion, we need to consider big time feeding the cows their energy requirement. If you don't bridge the UFL gap, cows will lose body condition score. So the spring could be anything. And so this is just an example here of a diet in late March 2019. And how, I wish we were back there now. So this is a daily feed budget of 18 kilos of grass dry matter allocated and 8 kilos of concentrate. And the estimated intake there was 23 kilos dry matter per day. That was 16.3 from grass and 7 from feed. And that's effectively 23 UFL. So what that means is that cow is covered to look after herself, to maintain her body condition, and produce 36 kilos of milk per day. And this year, March the 20th, 2023, the daily feed budget was 14 kilos grass silage dry matter. Why did we not give them any more? They wouldn't eat anymore. We tried. They were leaving it all behind them. And 8 kilos of concentrate. And that's 19 UFL. So that's maintenance plus 28 kilos of milk. So that's a much lower energy provision. So to cover this period where you're going to have grass silage in the diet, it's important that excellent grass silage is made, high energy grass silage and high intake. And this is a good example. And we were sitting in our dairy committee meeting today and asking, could we not make silage like this all the time? This silage is 81 for DMD. You can see it there in the middle, and it's 115 for intake. It's right at the top for intake. So that's exactly the type of grass silage that we should all be focusing on making to cover this spring period. No one knows from one year to the next, how much silage we're going to need to support milking cows in February and in March. But it makes the job a hell of a lot easier when silage quality is good. Other potential solutions then for energy balance issues and for low body condition would be once a day milking. And with once a day milking, very important to remember to feed them twice a day. And we've seen that on our own farm. If you don't underline that, don't take it for granted that the lads doing the milking will remember to feed them twice a day. And the other thing about once a day milking, we would always say, if we're advising this to farmers, to chat with their vet. So once a day milking, generally we don't see much effect on cell count. It certainly will reduce milk energy output, and that's what you want. But it will also improve energy balance. And in this comparison here, you can see that once a day milking improves energy balance in comparison to twice a day milking. So it's certainly something that we use. We have cows on our farm at the moment on once a day milking. Any thin cows go on once a day milking if we think their condition is 2.5 or below. And we generally find that improves their body condition score. And we're quite quick to use it. And of course, with the once a day milking, you can improve your energy status for individuals. So it's an important point. It's something that you can do for the individual. That's that little bit thing. So moving away then from energy status and maybe just think for a minute about minerals and trace elements. It's important to consider that there is a lot of grasses in Ireland that are low in major minerals that are important for fertility, such as phosphorus, in trace elements that are important for fertility, such as copper, such as iodine, and also maybe that are high in trace elements that might be antagonistic, such as molybdenum. So as you know, phosphorus deficiency is quite common, and it's often seen as pica. But it also has implications for fertility performance. And in my opinion, far too few farms sample grass for minerals and trace elements analysis. And at least, if you consider the minerals and trace elements, at the very least, you'd say that phosphorus, copper, including copper, molybdenum, sulfur interactions and iodine, that they may well have implications for fertility. And you can see based on the All Ireland Disease Survey data that, we do certainly have In the herds that are sampled, I think we have about 16% deficient in copper. Iodine, that was almost 40% that were deficient in iodine, the same for cobalt. And for selenium, I think the figure was about 13 or 14%. So it's important that there's a good strategy on the farm to deal with major minerals and trace elements. And we tend to deal with that through our concentrate feed at Lyons Farm. So just as an example, we generally provide 250 milligrams of copper, including 40% of that to come from a highly available form, either a chelated or a bioplex copper. And, I think that's important to do. Now, as things have moved on with regard to the environment, there's certainly an awful lot of emphasis on low protein supplements at grass. And there's certainly, a lot of evidence as well, that these low protein supplements, that they will benefit energy balance and also metabolic status. And, we've looked at this at Lyons Farm on a number of occasions, and we would be very comfortable using the lower protein supplements for grazing cows, because of course, grazed grass, contains an awful lot of protein. So this is just some research we had comparing 4 different supplements, 1 high protein supplements, and basically 3 low protein supplements. Now, some of the low protein supplements, the low protein here on its own, low protein plus methionine or low protein plus corn, they perform very, very well if you look at fat yield and protein yield, very, very similar to the high protein supplement. But from the point of view of the metabolic status, all of the low protein supplements resulted in lower levels of BHB. And also all of the lower protein supplements resulted in lower levels of blood urea nitrogen. So I would see that as improving metabolic performance. And that data is in typical grazing cows at Lyons Farm. So I would have no qualms really about using these lower protein supplements in grazing cows. An awful lot of our grass samples would be more than 20% for protein. So this is typical of the supplement that we are using at Lyons Farm. That's a 12% protein native nut. The formulation here is completely a formulation to reduce carbon footprint. So all of the feeds there, oats, barley, wheat feed, and beans, all of those feeds are sourced on this island. And if you like, in simple terms, that carbon footprint trumps everything from the point of view of dairy production. And with those really high cereal type diets, there does come a risk for acidosis. And I think it's something that we have to watch out for. And certainly we include controls for acidosis in our grazing cow compound. So just to sum up then, nutrition and husbandry, must be optimal to prevent calving problems. It's not only nutrition, it's about looking after cows in the calving pen or the colostrum pen. The diet could be perfect on paper, but, is the diet that the cow consumes, is it exactly the same as the diet on paper? Early lactation indoors is certainly a risk for underfeeding for many reasons. It still amazes me that farmers don't test their silage. I think, it's really important that they have an idea of the quality of their silage for a number of reasons. You can't really prevent calving problems unless you have the silage analyzed. And you can't really make a decision as to what's the right amount to supplement cow's milk in February indoors unless you know the energy content of the silage. Feed the correct amount of concentrate with the silage. So feed the cow her requirement or the average requirement for the cow in that herd. And try and make sure that feed space is adequate. Supplement to support the cow's energy status at grass. Again, remember, the farmer could be doing a fantastic job on the grass, but you really do need to look at the energy status of the cow. At pre-breeding exams are probably ongoing. As we're hoping will happen next week, the first one. Have a good look at the body condition score of cows that are presented to you and comment on them with the farmer. Some farms body condition score will be good, and in others it might be more challenging. If grass deficits arise, plug the gap with silage. You're hoping silage is available after morning milking, or increase the feed rates. And consider then mineral and trace element issues. At the very least, if there are farms that have had fertility problems in the past, in 2022, you know, they should be testing their grass for major minerals and trace elements. You know, and you know, in my opinion, probably in the month of April is the ideal time to do that. And get the grass tested for major minerals and trace elements, take a grab sample, and probably the right advice would be to cut it. So cut it at 4 centimeters from paddocks that are close to the grazing stage, and get it tested for minerals and trace elements. And finally, then lower protein supplements, they do a good job on metabolic status. Any farmer in a derogation now, they have to use the low protein supplements anyway. 15% is the max that they're allowed to use, but we should have no fear in using them. So that's all I wanted to cover tonight, folks. I certainly hope there's something in that that's of interest to you. Very happy to take any questions on that material now or at the end, and as Michelle sees fit. So thank you very much for listening.
Finbar, thank you very much. That was super. There's a huge amount of information in, and it's reflected in the amount of questions coming in. Just for anyone that joined late, we're actually going to have a panel discussion with our 4 industry experts at the end. So please keep your questions coming. Thank you, Finbar. And we will hand the screen over now to Martin Kavanagh. Many of you on this call will know Martin very well and have worked with him over the years. Martin is going to speak about sustainable breeding and sex semen, a very topical issue at the moment. Currently, Martin he was in practice for about 14 years and has done various jobs in the meantime, but at the moment he is a sustainability and business development manager with Munster Bovine. Thank you, Martin. We can see your screen. Thank you.
Great, and hopefully you can hear me as well, Michelle, yeah?
Yeah, good.
Okay, super. Good on you, Finbar. I think while you were talking, I was ringing about 20 farmers and telling them to feed about 8 kilos, because the one thing I've noticed, and it might come up in the questions, like our cows are getting better all the time and the production levels are getting better all the time, and we might be moving fast enough. So I think it's very timely and a really good piece, so I appreciate that. Thanks, MSD, for inviting me to come on. And yes, I have a role. I joined Munster last year, and again, we're looking at a lot of developments and a lot of areas that we're developing in, and one of these areas that we're talking about in terms of sex semen and the sustainability piece and how all that fits in. So we'll give a little bit of background. We'll talk about some of the detail on sex as vets. What do we need to know about it? What advice can we give? We'll brush around the SYNC programs a little bit. I'm not going to wear time into that. I think a lot of you guys are very familiar, and we can give you some strategies about how to manage it with an AI tech more than anything else. Okay, so I suppose from a Munster perspective, I'm just going to get rid of this. From a Munster perspective, nationally, about 120,000 sex semen straws were sold in 22. Our expectation is usage is definitely going to increase and probably double, and farmers are reacting to that situation as they get more into being much more selective about breeding heifers. Somewhere around 10% of the replacement heifer crop is coming from sexed. We'll know a lot more about this detail and within the next month when the calvings are finished and done. Just note that we import a certain amount of sex, but we have the majority of our sex semen is domestic. It's been produced by one company, Sexing Technologies, in both Moore Park and an NCBC lab in Naas, where Munster and Progressive Genetics are affiliated to, and it's sold under a trade name of Sexed Ultra Plus, and this can contain various levels of spermatozoa. Okay, we have determined from Munster's point of view, we only use the 4 million Ultra Plus at the highest concentration, and also we've been quite careful that we're only using sex semen from bulls with proven field fertility. So we would get updated details constantly from ICBF in terms of the fertility of the bulls that we're using, or the phenotypic fertility. And we don't use any test bulls. We don't use any G1 test bulls in their first year because they haven't got proven field fertility. Our bovine, our techs, there's 160 techs on the road. They go through pretty rigorous training in terms of the handle sex has to be handled in a different way. And we're really happy with 22. The feedback has been very positive. Yeah, we've 1 or 2 exception farms that hit bumps in the road, particularly around sinks and poor management of sinks. But in general, the feedback on conception rates from sexed has been very good. We can give you a little bit of detail on that as we go along. Okay, set the stage around the sustainability piece. And this is a slide that we got from ICBF last year. We use it quite a bit, and the co-ops have their own breakdown of this, but this is a national KPIs looking at roughly 14,400 of the creamery herds on the EBI figures. And this is broken down into quintiles in terms of EBI. So their top 20% are above 169, bottom 20% at 70, and we have a bunch of herds with no EBI in there. So what's the impact of that? In terms of milk production, when we look at it, the top 20 versus the bottom 20, there's about 70 kilos of milk solids, 65 kilos of milk solids approx there in the difference on average. So 100 cow herd, €6 for a kilo of milk solids roughly. There's about 39 grand in terms of income. I won't call that margin or profit, income. So we know if we break out, EBI has that impact. So sustainability wise, how is that affecting us? Really, when we look at it, we know that the carbon output is lower in those top 20% herds. And unfortunately, as vets, we're probably working in that middle group quite a bit in terms of fertility. Because if we look at the fertility piece in here, and the average six-week calving rates, down at that bottom 20%, we're looking at around 60%, let's call it that, in 6 weeks. And again, the top 20% at 80%. So there's a significant difference. And again, it just highlights for us one of those other issues is knowledge, is in terms of data and how the interpreter use data. And we would see that with our own experience, milk recording about 6,200, 6,300 herds, but 83% of the herds in that top bracket are milk recording. Okay, so that, and in that middle group, it doesn't really change a lot. You know, it's 40 to 60%. There isn't a massive difference in there. So from a sustainability point of view, what are those top guys doing versus the bottom guys in terms of management? Where are the replacements going to come from? And we'd probably suggest that at that bottom 20%, you're really looking at those herds. Bottom 20, 40%, should they be breeding replacements at all? If we're looking at these sustainability pieces beyond picking individual cows with high EBI, maybe over 150 and using them. While the top group, definitely, a lot of that group we find are using sex semen, producing quite a lot of heifers. But if there isn't a market for them, if they're not able to sell them into the other groups, they constantly improve their own genetic merit. But we're not seeing the benefit right across all the herds. So the key message really is not all herds are the same. And those impacts in terms of fertility, in terms of sustainability and so on, are very different on a herd by herd basis. And we would see that as being largely driven by EBI and the attitude towards EBI. So we need to keep that in mind. Who is going to use sex? Who is it appropriate for? And it's not appropriate for all herds because we do not want to breed poor quality stock into the national herd. Okay, so again, if we look at sex, why are we going to use it? It's really selecting the best performing cows, more heifer calves from them, but also really, really increasing the number of high-value beef calves with a saleable calf and taking out the numbers of low-value dairy bulls. And the dairy farmer has a very particular mindset as against the person who's purchasing the calf in terms of what they consider value. And to a lot of the times, the dairy farmer, it's a saleable animal, get it off the farm. Okay, so we've clear goals in there. There's clear advantages of sex. Sex is 90% purity. Not all sex semen will deliver you a heifer. And people have to be cognizant of that. If we use 100,000 straws, there's going to be a farm there somewhere that gets all bulls. And that'll happen by the law of numbers. So we be careful how we handle the narrative. So 90% purity, 9 out of 10 are going to be female. The sorting process really drops the window for fertilization. So viability of sperm in the tract, and also the capacitation. So and we'll come to it a little bit later, but sex semen is capacitating and more capacitated once it's in the female tract after AI compared to conventional. Sex semen trials in Ireland are pretty successful. We have a relative conception rate conservatively around 80%. So that means if I'm achieving 60% normally in my herd on sex, I get around 48%. But that applies to like for like cows. And one thing we're very clear on here is that our conception rate with sex semen really improves by good pre-selection. Selecting the right females in terms of their health, their fertility history, and so on, improves that conception rate. And we can easily hit those 60% conception rates on sex with good selection and smart timing of AI. So we approached, there's a lot of, I suppose, warning talk around sex, but if we just think about it a little bit, without too much work, we can actually achieve quite high conception rates with sext. We do recommend to use early in the season. If you do get a bump in the road, at least from that point of view, you've time to catch up. But also critically here, we are really looking at our highly fertile stock in the early part of the season, calve long enough and have the ability to go and calve for us. This is one thing we do find, and we should find this with beef bulls as well. Beef bulls, even with conventional, with genomics, anything where we're looking for a particular outcome in a group of bulls, be it sex, genomics, beef, and so on, and using large numbers or large numbers of straws, we really need to spread risk by using a team of bulls. You will get batches of semen that mightn't do the job for you. So we need to spread the risk. It's low, but definitely in the larger herds or larger numbers, we get even up to a team of 5 sex bulls in there, particularly even on large sinks. Okay. So herd selection for us. Getting rid of this now as well. I'm going to hide this floating meeting controls. Okay. Selecting herds, we select herds with really, really good history, and that's pushing us into those high category herds. They have good 6-week calving rates, have good attention to detail, and their nutrition is quite locked in. And even more than that, they have a cow fit for purpose for their system. So their nutrition system is appropriate for the cow and vice versa. So it meets those issues that Finbar is bringing up there. So fully fed herd we're looking for, and definitely herds with high FERT sub-index. So when we look at an EBI report, we're looking at those herds definitely 55, 60 euro in the fertility sub-index and higher. If we look at heifers are really our most fertile. Most fertile. Generally, they're carrying the highest genetic merit in the herd, and they're a real option for sext. But one of the key things here, we look at the target weights. Are we achieving them? And a real handy ready reckoner for this thing is look at the maintenance sub-index of those heifers in the EBI report. So you'll see the 22 calves this year breeding in 23. It'll be the 21. It'll be the 22 group, and you'll see what their maintenance sub-index is. And that'll give you an idea of what the expected mature weight is going to be in those cows. So say, for instance, I'm 10 on maintenance index, my mature weight is expected 590 kilos. My target weight at breeding is 355. So if we're going to use sext on these heifers, we want all the heifers target weight on or above. Now, not super fat. We do not want fat heifers, absolutely not. But we want conditioned heifers that are above target weight across the group, not an average. Not an average if you're doing a sync program in particular. So with heifers, we get more replacement of highest genetic stock. And the one thing about putting sext into heifers, we get easier calving down the road. All heifers need to be above their target. Cycling regularly, we want these heifers to have gone through probably minimum of 2 cycles, if not 3. We want these intakes. A lot of heifers are got to grass early. Some of them have gone back in. Some guys have them inside. And again, if that silage quality isn't good enough, we're not driving these heifers on. So we've got to watch the concentrate supplementation. We're making sure we're getting good intakes during breeding and the month after, but also pre-breeding. We want these guys growing, and out of grass, they'll do 1 kilo a day, quite easy, if grass intakes are good. Get the vaccines in and supplements, and keep driving home the message, particularly on maidens, out farms. Let those BVDs. I regard Ireland as an open system. And I think there's so many heifers gone to out farms that we really don't know what the BVD status is over the hedge. I'm very cautious on it. And again, if we do need supplementation, like Finbar has pointed out, in case there is some trace element deficiency, it may be advisable, particularly with these heifers when we're using sext. Okay, cow selection, a little bit different. First of all, we got to make a decision. Are we going to sink cows in? Or are we going to actually bull cows in that first maybe 2 weeks in the breeding season with sex as they're coming to us? But if we're going to do that, and we're going to get into the timing, we generally will select more cows for sex than straws we buy. The reason being is we could have 10 cows on the brush when the AI technician arrives, but only 5 of them are actually on correctly, or there are enough distance from standing heat to warrant sext. And this is really, really critical. There is no point in putting sex semen into a cow that isn't in the right stage in terms of being within a window towards ovulation, because we're not going to get them and we're going to get failure. So we need to really think about that. Cows calve more than 60 days, clean and cycling. This is an opportunity for you guys if you're doing pre-breeding work. Make sure even on metri checks and so on, they're okay. And again, that they didn't have problems, no problems back at the calving point. We rule those cows out immediately. I have a tendency to rule out high cell count cows as well. I'm not confident really on their conception rates. Younger cows have higher conception, so we will use the younger cows, but be a little bit careful on first calvers. If guys haven't been as careful as they should be, if they've got low BCS, milking hard, they haven't coated off, haven't sorted themselves out, they're not really going to be my first choice, even though their genetic merit is going to be higher in the herd. Decent body condition. Finbar has said it all. We will watch the energy balance around that early breeding period, April. Watch the bull tank for any sudden drops in protein and volume. Look, I'm careful about looking at ratios and tanks. I'm not sure about that. I don't think it's necessarily always correct, but sudden shifts in protein, drops in protein and volume is certainly an indication of poor dry matter intake and poor energy intake. So I think it's reasonable. So those are main points really on selecting individual cows. So AI timing, when we're looking at it, remember, following sex sorting, sperm capacitation has commenced. It'll be way more advanced, okay? So at the time of insemination compared to conventional. So conventional, we can leave it in the tract longer, it survives a lot longer as it capacitates through. With sexed, we can't. So it's more rapid in capacity. It's more rapidly ready to fertilize. So it's ready to go. You get in there and the AIs need to be close to that ovulation window. It's lower survivability. So when we look at capacitation within 8 hours, we're getting a lot of our spermatozoa and sexed is getting ready to fertilize. So using sex semen, the rule is they should be inseminated 10 to 20 hours after the start of standing heat, closer to the point of ovulation. A recommendation for conventional is inseminated any time during standing heat and up to 12 hours after the end of standing heat. So we've a much wider window here. And if you look at it just in a graphical sense, let's close that box. That conventional semen, that kind of 20 and even 22-hour period there from the start of standing heat, and sexed 14 to 20 hours after the start. So we're getting much closer to that ovulation window at about that 28 hours after the start of standing heat. So practically, what does this mean? What does it actually mean? Okay, from our point of view, and we're looking from AI companies, guys who are not doing DIY and are there twice a day, it's a different story. So AI techs visit generally once a day. That's all we can do, and there's a reason for that. So when the AI tech arrives, some of the dams will be suitable for sex, depending on onset of heat, and the rest will get conventional. Hence, we pre-select more cows than straws. Rule of thumb, if AI tech is coming in the morning, then if the cow is on heat that morning, she must get conventional. If she's on heat the previous evening, she must be suitable for sexed. And this can be a real mess with heifers if guys are not clued in on heat detection here and they're not really using the heat detection well, or bringing in heifers that are in pro-estrus. If AI is conducted twice a day, AM/PM rule will apply. Most dams will be suitable either AM or PM, and you can them. So lads are doing their own AI or getting a double visit from AI techs, and some AI techs may double visit in their first week if it suits them, if it's on their run, but it's not common. If we're unsure, we use conventional. So heat detection is king, but also you got to recognize the time insemination is most likely to happen on the farm. So there's two elements to it. And the one thing we need to be careful of in large herds, and you guys have seen this and we see it in repeat intervals and fertility reports, there's a lot of noise in larger herds. So we get a lot of cows that will come on in that first 2 weeks, and they'll bring cows with them. So we get a lot of pro-estrus cows in there, and they're not actually fit. They're neither fit for conventional nor sexed, a lot of those cows. But we never leave a cow that we suspect is on heat without the benefit of semen. So we just need to be sensible that if cows are coming in and we know they're only coming in quite quickly or quite early on the early onset that they get conventional. We really like to use sync programs, particularly in heifers, because we can nail the timing of AI, and that has got a lot better. And the sync programs now are much more accurate in terms of predicting the ovulation and predicting the time of AI. So they play a really important role when we're using sexed. We also were giving those animals, if they're on sync, particularly heifers, a few more opportunities to go and calf. And if we bag the repeats, we still stay within that very tight into that 3-week window. So we're still getting, say, 2 serves in that 3-week period that we can get in and get more cows and calf to push that 6-week calving rate. So huge benefits of sync. Just to comment on AI text visiting, I don't know how easy it is for you to see that. I should have used a much bigger slide, but that is representing last year, 2022, and those orange bars are representative of numbers of inseminations per day. So when we look at our peak, roughly around May the 5th in here, 5th, 6th, we knocked in 11,500 serves in one day. So we have a very narrow window where our AI techs are flat to the boards. This is the level of compactness that's coming in breeding. So the bottom graph here shows last year again, the times in the day when the AI, when most serves are done. So again, when we look at it, our window here is from just kind of early morning, 8 o'clock in the morning to about lunchtime, 1 o'clock. That's our key time that we're going to get an AI tech in the yard. We have another little bump in the evening, but that'll just tell you the volume of serves that are being done. Like at that hour, say, let's call it 7 o'clock in the evening, around then, we're knocking out maybe 380 serves in that time, as against nearly 1,300 there at around 11 o'clock in the day. So we're not getting that AM PM opportunity. So we must be a lot more fussy about selecting our cow and making sure she's at the right point for sex at the time the AI tech arrives. Okay, so keep that in mind, and it's massively relevant from a veterinary perspective in terms of synchronization programs. Not going to go through them. These protocols are extremely well known at this stage. There's been an adjustment this year, particularly in both protocols for sex semen, in terms of the timing of AI. There's a little adjustment to it, which has been researched by Chagas and is quite reliable. And we found quite a few of our AI techs last year were using this adjustment themselves anyway from what they were finding. So if we're going to do a sync protocol, line up AI company and tech well in advance, proper dates, make sure we've semen availability and so on. And we need some conventional straws knocking around in our flask as well. Remember that handling sex semen from thaw to use under 5 minutes, and some research will say under 2 minutes. These guys can't thaw a lot of straws, stick them down their back and head off for the crush. We really need everything beside the crush, thaw quickly, in quickly. Our good AI techs and heifers can get this done quite fast, but we will hit bumps on these type of sync programs, particularly in very cold weather. If we don't have warming of guns in cold weather, we can run into trouble. If the distance between the crush and the van is too long, we run into trouble. We've seen on a couple of farms, we didn't cop it on a farm actually, even with conventional, we're hitting poor conception rates in conventional semen because it was nearly a 4 or 5 minute walk to get from the van, and AI tech was using about 9 straws at a time. So that was creating a lot of difficulty on conventional. Okay, contact your vet, and this is where you guys fit in. That you guys need to know exactly when these techs are going to land in. So work backwards from where the tech lands in and work in your fixed time AI protocol. So we want to delay insemination for sex to the afternoon in most of these. So if we can free up the AI tech, they're busy in the morning. Remember that peak? They're crazy in the morning getting cows done and conventional, some sexed, but they have more time in the afternoon. If they've set up a sync and they know what's happening, we can stick in a team of AI techs in for a big sync and get it done in the afternoon because they're less under pressure, but it needs to be pre-arranged. Okay. You all understand about P4 device insertion, being clean, maybe cutting strings for heifers and so on. So you appreciate all that. Okay, for the farmer, one thing we will say very strongly, sync programs, and you know this, and this is advice you will give anyway, won't camouflage that poor management. Some of that stuff that Finbar has stressed and is massively important. We need good facilities to handle large groups. It's getting crazy with the numbers of cows that are on at one time, numbers of heifers on together. It's bedlam. If the facilities aren't good, we are really looking out at backing out of some of these big sinks. They're too difficult and they're too dangerous. And so again, assess your client. Can they do it? Have they got the facilities? Really helpful if you guys get involved in that. Farmer must help the tech access the crush I talked about. And one thing we've seen with grouping animals in very large sinks and large cow sinks, we found Sometimes the time it takes to give the last GnRH, your last receptor in there, you could be an hour, 2 hours organizing cows, drafting them out, grouping them, and so on. So we need those cows to remain in those type of groups so they come in for insemination at the right time or not out on hours. And some big sinks, you can end up in a situation where actually your timing is off because animals have got GnRH over a period of time or the group is being split. So also, again, we like to group the cows if we can according to the bulls, according to the teen bulls and large sinks, so that guys we're not having confusion with handhelds and straws being used. These are just some of the practical issues that we come across. So you just don't go into a sink system blindfolded. Just note for sex with cows, normally on a normal sink program, we bull them from about 9 o'clock in the morning to 1 o'clock. For sex, we push it out a couple of hours. We're going from noon into the afternoon, which really suits our techs. The other one for heifers, that's a relatively new protocol. They're getting their GnRH 48 hours after device removal, and we're putting in the semen. They're getting inseminated then in the afternoon. So that means that our injections have kicked off in the mornings. Okay, so it kicked off in the mornings. Our last GnRH, last receptor, 9 a.m. on day 8, and then we're inseminating them in the afternoon. Guys are happy with it. They just hold the heifers in the yard, and AI tech arrives on. So it's useful and it's easy to do. Okay, that's well researched by Chagas. We're looking at anywhere, we probably on average you get a bump of 5% in conception rate if we delay the insemination. Okay, facilities, you're more familiar with this. You know what's going on. You're dealing with these crushes all the time. You keep trying to reiterate it as best you can with people you can communicate with as best you can. We need locking gates, anti-vacuum bars. With the VOS being done, speed, we need AI techs to get in and out. They can get a hammering if these cows are not set up, and there's generally no help. The cows are just left there. So distances from tank, escape routes. We're getting crazy cows in some places, causing problems for us. And definitely we recommend in those slippy yards, throw half a bucket of sand down around the crush, around the area. Cows will have grip, we won't get any injuries. Decent washing and disinfection so we can maintain some level of biosecurity and a bit of help. And also remember that if we get into those sink programs or a high volume of sexed in the early part of the season, we may get a lot of heifers they want to keep early on, calving very, very quickly. Have we got enough calf facilities and calf facilities for them? Really, really important that there's a repeat strategy. Remember, you're going to get 50% of procs are going to come back to you in 18 to 24 days. If you have a group of 50 animals that are synced in, unsexed, and we get a whole bunch of them coming back repeating, bulls won't manage that. Young bulls, they'll do 1.5 animals a day. Mature bulls a bit more. But if you suddenly have 25 animals coming on within about a 3-day period, one or two bulls are not going to manage that. So it's a mistake to do that. So we suggest scratch card and crayon up those heifers again from about day 16. Two methodologies for heat detection. Get in, heat detect, and pick them up with AI. And from that point of view, again, we get high genetic merit semen into those heifers again in that early part of the season. So there is a benefit for it. We can look at then bulls coming in for the next repeat and mopping up those animals. So we should have everything done within kind of a 6-week period there. Okay, I'm coming to the end of it. Sex semen, look, we're very positive about it. I think we've given a lot of warnings about how to use it. And I think farmers have been aware, AI techs have been aware. I think vets have been very, very helpful in the way that they've stuck with the synchronization protocols. And they haven't gone off piste. A couple of farmers have gone off piste with a few things that they've done. We generally identified it when we got low conception rates. So is the herd suitable? Are we fully fed? And are we at the right end of that EBI piece? Is the cow okay? Are we picking the right heifers, preparing them correctly? Again, same for the cows. And I think you guys can contribute again to that. And sometimes, we're asked the question, how do we start identifying, the right cows in the herd? So there's ways and means of doing that. Use early in the breeding season in case of a bump. Timing of AI is king, okay? But acknowledge how the AI system operates on the farm, be it a DIY AI. Can you do AM, PM? What's the reality? Are you on a tech service that's only coming once a day? That will completely change your outcomes in terms of how sex operates in the farm. Enough bulls in the team, 5 if we're doing a big sink or a big number of cows. Synchronization, I think, will really help us here, and we're very pushy on it, particularly on the heifers. Set up those timings, right facilities and grouping, and we definitely have a decent repeat strategy. You'll see on the screen that we have a breeding and fertility management notes that we produce. We have a new set this year, and on the back page of them that contains all the dairy sync protocols for conventional and sex semen. And again, it's full of information, and some of that, everything from, you know, all those different legs of the stool. I was interested that Finbar had 6 legs. I thought it was very, very important. And again, we're trying to focus on those areas as much as we can. And it can be a useful addition to your armory in terms of you guys having to write out a whole bunch of notes again. Okay, so at that, thanks very much. And thanks for the opportunity, MSD. It was great. And hopefully I'll be able to answer some questions if you have them. So I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Martin, that was brilliant. Thank you so much. A great combination of science and practical advice. And I think we'll all have a lot more confidence to use sex semen and a lot of information around it. So thank you so much for that. Just one thing before we move on to Catherine, where would vets get the breeding and fertility management booklet?
Oh, okay. Well, we've heaps of them on Munster Bovine, might be on YouTube. On our website, you go onto Munster Bovine's website, you can download it there and print it off. If you want the nice glossy version of it, look, make contact even with myself. And if you want a bunch to put into practice or something like that, or use them, give us a shout, and we'll have somebody passing. We'll drop in a heap to you. All right.
Thank you very much for that. That's great. I'm sure you'll get plenty of requests. Thank you, Martin.
Thank you.
Next up, our third speaker, third of 4, is Catherine Heffernan. Catherine is our customer and technical manager with our monitoring technology Sense Hub. And tonight she's going to speak about utilizing data to make more informed decisions on fertility. So hopefully you'll find this informative. Thank you, Catherine.
Thanks, Michelle. Can you just confirm there you can see my screen?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. Now?
Yes, perfect. And we can hear you too. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so thanks very much, Michelle. So this evening, I'm going to take you through a little bit about Sense Hub, how it works, and as Michelle said, how we can make informed decisions from this. So Sense Hub is monitoring technology, which is this vets and farmers make better decisions at farm level. So we have a collar and we have an ear tag device which measure 10 different algorithms from the animals. So you can see a list of them here in front of me. We have side lying, low activity, medium activity, high activity, eating, rumination, walking, grazing, heavy breathing, and abnormal behavior. So all these are being measured off the animal every minute of the day, and they're stored in the collar or ear tag for up to 24 hours. So the animal only needs to wear one device, either the collar or the ear tag. And the only difference really between them is that the collar has an average life of 7 years and the ear tag has an average life of 4. The collar has a warranty of 5 and the ear tag has 4. So the animal only has to have one of these devices on, and this information is being gathered off the animal at all times. Once the animal comes into signal, we have a Sense Hub controller which is mounted generally in a central location on the farm. Generally, this is at the back of the milking parlour, and it's important that the calving house, the winter housing, and where the cows are coming in from the field are monitored at all time. So you see the range is 500 meters in the front, 100 meters either side, and 80 meters behind. But if you remember, the collar or ear tag, whichever one the animal is wearing, will hold this information for 24 hours. So we don't have to be in line of sight at all times. So once the animal hits the yard, this information that has been gathered from the animal is then dropped off to the Sense Hub controller. So once that information hits the Sense Hub controller, it is then displayed in a simple to use app on the farmer's phone, or it can be accessed on desktop version either. So we have 3 different modules within Sense Hub. We have reproduction, we have health, and we have group monitoring. For the purpose of today's presentation, I'll solely just speak about the reproduction and touch a little bit on the health too. So in terms of reproduction, how the system picks up an animal in heat is by a drop of rumination, a change of eating, and an increase in activity. So you can see it here on, this is typically what the farmer would see on their phone. So on the right hand side, you can see these animals are presented to the farmer every day in this type of format. So we see the animals at lactation, the days in milk, the breeding window, which I'll go through, and the heat index. There are also a number of areas which are taken into consideration as well, including when the animal had the last heat, if it's present, when the animal last calved. But it's important to note that we're linked with ICBF, so therefore the status of the animal is very important, but it's always kept up to date through our link with ICBF. So for example, if a cow calves and we register the calf, this automatically comes into SenseHub, so the status of the cow is correct. This avoids any double entry of data. Previously, farmers would have had to put the data into SenseHub, into herd apps, etc. But now it's all automatic, so it makes the system a lot more accurate. Once the animals are in heat and are presented on the app, as shown in the last slide, each animal has what's known as the breeding window. And I think this refers back to, and is obviously very relevant as to what Martin has just spoke about. So for each individual animal, we have the top line here, which you see is the sex semen window, and the bottom line here is the conventional semen window. So once the animal has come off, off standing heat, the countdown timer will start. So typically you're going to see the animal bulling and being active, and then a number of hours later, this will appear in your system. So this is a 30-hour breeding window total, and you can see this black triangle. So this black triangle is typically the arm on the clock for this individual animal's heat. So this counts down. It'll start at hour 26 and count backwards. So we can see this particular example, the animal has 8 hours left. So we see this cow is ideal for sex, or you still get her for conventional. But what you're aiming for is the green. So you're aiming for the green window. So for the top, we see the hours 15 to hours -1. And on the bottom for conventional, you see hour 23 to hour 7. So this is back to what Martin spoke about in terms of, you know, trying to plan ahead and trying to organize your sex semen. That's obviously is a challenge. But the beauty of this is it allows, you're generally going to know in the morning what is going to be ready for AI for the evening, or the same in the evening, you're going to almost know what's going to be ready for the following morning. So this will allow you to prepare and plan. And typically, very much as to what's been already spoken here today, if you see a cow jumping this morning, it's generally nearly tomorrow morning by the time she's actually going to be ideal time for sex semen. So allowing each and every individual animal have this breeding window allows you to prepare, plan, and obviously increase your chances of conception. Another report within the reproduction section of SenseHub is your anestrus cow report. Your anestrus cow report is a report which identifies animals which aren't showing signs of heat. So if a cow calves, if the animal doesn't have a heat for 50 days, she'll appear in this list. If the animal has had 1 heat, from thereafter it will be 30 days. So this report populates itself all the time. The farmers don't have to actually put anything in here or edit anything. So this would be the list which is presented to the vet in order to check and treat the animals accordingly. Once the animal has a heat, she'll automatically come off this list. So this is a list which we're getting a lot of questions about at the moment, and would be these cows will be presented to vets in order to intervene. As I said, the beauty of it is the farmer doesn't have to do anything, and throughout the next number of weeks, this will continue to be populating where necessary. The second report in the reproduction is your irregular heat report. So this is a report which identifies animals which have had 3 or more heats within 30 days. And this would, I suppose, identify any animals that potentially may be cystic. So also another report which farmers will be pulling out cows to be treated by their vets in advance of the breeding season. Again, once the heat settle down and things become normal again, these animals will leave this list. Just to refer back to Finbar's presentation, we have a report within the system called the Early Fresh Cow Report, and I suppose this is very much relevant at the moment. And as we have some later cows calving, which generally are the ones that nearly get forgotten about, they go from the parlour straight out to the field. The Early Fresh Care Report is a very beneficial report in terms of monitoring your transition period and how your nutrition is going in the early days. So you can see we have you have the animal's number, her lactation, her days in milk, but you see you have the animal's daily rumination. And as we know, you want to aim to try get rumination up as fast as possible within the early days of calving to reduce any issues, any metabolic issues. So this for vets, for nutritionists, is a very useful tool to identify the status of the cows, or help you identify the status of the cows from the rumination of these individual animals. We also have the option to make some custom reports. So I just use this one for example, a sex semen cow report, just to link it back to what Martin had discussed. Being able to filter out animals by their days in milk, how many heats they've had, how many days it is since their last heat. So having this information, or being able to filter this information out and couple it with the information that you'd be taking from your ICBF or working with your breeding companies, all are extra pieces of the puzzle that help make your breeding season as successful as possible. And just to finish then, I suppose, again, just to refer back to what Finbar mentioned on nutrition in terms of early lactation, Senso does identify it does identify heat issues, for example, LDAs, mastitis, milk fever, diet change, etc. But for this particular example, I chose this acidosis example, because I suppose hopefully we will be going to second round grass soon, and this is just an example in terms of, I suppose, nutrition, that one particular farmer, there was a big growth of grass, nitrogen shot up through the ground, and he woke up in the morning and he had a distress alert. And there was one animal that was clinically sick, that was very acidic. But I suppose what this helped him do was, there were 13 other animals on the list, and their status wasn't great, but they didn't physically look sick. So the system allowed that farmer to work with his vet to treat the existing sick animal, but also to be able to pull out the remaining 13, put them inside and give them fibre. So I suppose it's just being able to have this information to make the management decisions, but for vets to be able to look at this information when trying to make or resolve an issue on a farm, I think can be quite beneficial. And that takes me to the end. If anybody has any questions at the end, I'm happy to take them. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Catherine. That was super. And we'll come back to, there's a lot of questions about where the vet fits into this Anistos report. So we'll come back to that in the panel discussion. What is the time difference you would recommend when treating pyometra between pre-treatment with Estramate and subsequent Metricure?
I mean, if you've got pyometra, you treat straight away with Metricure. In terms of again, if you've got pyometra, you treat straight away. Once you know that you've got the infection, you treat with Estramate, and that gives you've got the effect on the smooth muscle. So you can use both at the one time. Okay,
good to know. And actually, Eleanor, there's one more for you, and then I'll come to the others. Can you give Metricure at the same time as AI?
So no, there's a good chance that Metrocure will kill off sperm. So generally you'll have to wait about 24 hours after AI. I mean, obviously if there's infection there in the first place, you should probably be treating that first before you do anything to do with AI, but technically you can give it 24 hours after AI.
Super. Thank you very much.
All
you
right.
can take a little rest now with your voice. Finbar, you've had a long rest now, so I'm going to come to you with a few questions. It's obviously been a challenging March, so there's a lot of questions around nutrition. The first one is, for early lactation cows that are key, what are the key parameters to look at on silage analysis for feeding in February and March?
Okay, well, you know, I always look at the DMB, and very simple rule of thumb, for milking cows, I think DMB, the minimum threshold we should be looking at is 75. So a very simple figure, DMB of 75%, and look at the intake factor. Intake factors are not difficult. If you look at the intake factor, you'll see a scale, and you want the intake factor close to the top of the scale. So that's very, very important, the intake and the DMB. Look, a lot of other stuff is important as well, but for example, ammonia, nitrogen, you know, that will indicate preservation quality, so will pH, but energy value, so 75% DMB, that will tally 100%, they're correlated, DMB and energy value are correlated, energy value and intake. For me, they're the two important ones. You will not have a good intake factor if preservation quality is poor. It won't happen.
Okay, thank you for that. And I think we'll all be doing energy status calculations after tonight, and we realize maybe we're underfeeding our cows, especially at the moment. You mentioned to help rise the body condition score, and as we said, we're 3 weeks to breeding, so time is not our friend. How long would you milk them for once a day?
Okay, so we would normally put them on once a day as soon as we notice them thin. So that would be very soon after calving, and we think it's important maybe to put them on once a day before they actually hit peak. And now our cows wouldn't have peaked yet, we're at the end of March, but we would put them as soon as we noticed them. And in the past, we have not taken them off once a day until the first 6 weeks of the breeding season have passed. And the thinking there, rightly or wrongly, is we don't want to give them an insult to their energy status until the first 6 weeks of the breeding season are over. And we have found that that works quite well. At lions, bear in mind, 80% could be in calf after the first 6 weeks. So that's the strategy we use. We've used it in years where we've done more than 600 kilos of fat and protein. So I know Chagas have the data there, they've the research done, you know, on the impact that different periods of once a day have on the output. But I would say that you can certainly use once a day and have high output for a grazing herd, absolutely. And we're happy with it.
Brilliant. Okay. LDAs, we hear a lot about them, and obviously we look at the impact it has on putting them back in calf. It's something we see a lot, and we catch them early with Sense Hub. But in terms of nutrition and LDAs,
okay,
make a comment on that.
So nutrition and LDAs, so basically you have to cover off issues around calcium and milk feed. You have to cover off issues around ketosis. So that has to happen with the dry cow diet. Immediately post calving, you have to promote feed intake. I actually have a photograph, I have a video there of a heifer immediately post calving at Lions, and she still hadn't cleaned yet, and she has the best quality silage you can get on the farm. And in my opinion, that has to be the best quality grass silage. Don't be giving them whole crop or maize silage or mixes of grass silage and whole crop. For the very simple reason, grass silage is much higher in calcium than either maize silage or whole crop. Give them, if you can give them a palatable drink, our guys like giving the post-calving drinks. And to be quite honest, the dairy lads and Lions, they just feel better from giving the cow the drinks, and the farm manager's happy to pay for it. It's no big expense. We give it to them. Do everything you can, in other words, in the calving pen, immediately post-colostrum, to promote feed consumption, particularly forage consumption. But also we give them all 2 kilos of nuts, and that will have no impact on them. Our cows get 2 kilos of nuts if they're calved at. If they get that at 2 a.m, they still get their feed the next day. It doesn't impact them at all. And the nut will bring in a nice bit of calcium and energy for the cow as well. So a lot of it is preventative with the dry cow diet. You must cover off on issues around lipid metabolism, ketosis, energy metabolism. You must cover off on issues around hypocalcemia. But after that, there's a nice bit of TLC that cannot be forgotten about, as I would say, in the colostrum or fresh cow pen. And them first few hours are critical. Like I had 0% as my target for displacements on the slide, and in my opinion, that is achievable. This year at Lions, we have a new dairy man and a new feeding man, but I actually can't remember the last time we had a displacement at Lions. So I think that is achievable, definitely.
Super, thank you for that. And there's a comment here. Hi Finbar, brilliant presentation. Currently on Lions Farm, what is going on? What is going in with the silage? Just to recap, you said it was 14 kilos of silage and 8 kilos of meal in parlour. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's 100%. That's what we fed last week, and we're not happy with that. That's not enough. We showed a comparison there with 2019. The difference is the weather, and look at none of us can control that. But we're on what 19 UFLs intake. Martin talked about milk protein there. I have a milk protein from 7 days ago, only came through there tonight. I was looking during the webinar, 3.13%. And that's because we're on silage. And doesn't matter what anyone says, even the energy in silage is not the energy that's in fresh grass. It's already been fermented. The bugs in the rumen don't grow on it as well as they do on fresh grass. It's like we're not happy with that. We had a threshold at Lions for years to hit 22 UFL. And what I'd be saying to vets is get farmers to work out what's their 22 UFL. On our farm, it's 22 UFL. On another farm, it might be 20, it might be 19. On a high output farm, maybe, you know, it could be 23 or 24. But work out what level of energy provision will give you a good energy status. But that's what our diet is at the minute. It's 14 kilos of 73 DMD silage. We have tried to feed them more and they wouldn't eat it. And it's 8 kilos of meal. And the meal is that native nut. So it's a high cereal nut. And I made the point, that's the way the carbon footprint is driving us. But that does increase risk for acidosis. So we need to watch that.
Okay, thank you for that. If you're a veterinary practitioner going on into a yard tomorrow, and we spoke earlier on about, you know, the fertility driving profitability on farm, and if we have a retrospective look of how the calving went, what advice would a vet be giving to a farmer now in terms of getting them ready for breeding?
Getting them ready for breeding, well, pre-breeding the exams. So I mean, next week we'll do pre-breeds and we'll want to pick up on any issues. So I mean, you know, if calving went really well, you're hoping there are no issues with pre-breeds. I mean, we do that at Lions, we do them all. I'm quite well aware that a lot of places they won't do them all, but we will do them all, and we'll, you know, anything that needs attention non-cycling wise or needs any hormone protocol, they'll get that with the vets from UCD. And then basically I would be focusing on, as I said, energy intake. You should know, I mean, if fertility went really, really well in 2022, that's good. And but if it didn't, you know, and I advised a farm recently from County Cork, you know, get your grass tested immediately for major minerals and trace elements. If fertility was at question in 2022, that herd had a 16% empty rate. And speaking to the vet on the phone, like, that's a really well run herd. They're very, very happy. But certainly the advice I had was calculate your energy balance now. What is your energy balance now? What will it be next week? What are grass growth predictions for next week? It's brilliant now. We have these predictions. The lads are telling me in Lions today, grass growth is predicted to be 40 next week. So they can already mock up the diet for next week. And, you know, the week after that, they can mock up the diet for the week after. So what energy allowance do you want to be on? What are your cows giving you? Are there any issues from fertility in 2022 that need to be addressed, like the grass analysis? And that really needs to be done now, because, you know, how much time do you really have to correct that? In my opinion, there's no point doing that on grass that's been growing since November. You really have to do it on second rotation grass that's grown in the current year, if you like. But you don't have much time to correct it.
No, time is not our friend. If we can get over the rain on Friday, we'll have an exciting week of growth next week. So that's good news. Thank you, Finbar. Catherine, you might just come in there on the Anistres report. And we see more and more that vets are becoming part of the pre-breeding check as opposed to the scanning side of it. And obviously it's a very important side. Where could they use Sense Hub to help them with this?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, Michelle, from the day the cow calves, they're technically being pre-bred. So this report is being calculated all the time. So generally we'd say at this stage, like as Finbar just mentioned there, from this stage, you're looking at pre-breeding. So the vets will absolutely be able to look at that report from now on. And treat accordingly, and then be able to monitor, the farmer will be able to monitor then the animals that are leaving accordingly. What we're seeing generally what we generally see is about 10% of cows seem to be kind of coming in there. That's kind of typically what we're seeing on herds. And I suppose the beauty of that is, like, you know, even those later cows are being picked up in that report as the season goes on. So it's just kind of keep checking in, the vets check in, or ask your farmers that have sent up to just to show you that list or identify what is in that list for you.
Super. I have one more question for you, Catherine, and Martin, you could be warming up then, because I have 3 shooters for you, and we'll wrap it up then, because I know everybody's tired. Catherine, cows are in and out at the moment. Does this affect the heat and health and the accuracy of the information we're getting from the collars?
Yeah, so it's a good question. Absolutely. So absolutely, like, yes and no, I suppose, is a simple answer to that. But when cows go out first, out from an indoor diet into grass, like, animals are going from a feed of probably 35% dry matter out to grass, which earlier in the days was probably maybe 18%. So there is going to be a massive variability there. And as we're back to even what Finmer has spoke about, you know, that is a big jump. It's, you know, going to have a big effect in terms of energy intake, etc. So what I've seen over the last number of weeks is you would see quite a lot of fluctuations early in the days when the animals are fresh and the system is getting used to the fact that the animals are changing diet. But in fact, more recently, I think that the system is learning every animal and every animal's behaviours every day. So the fact that they are going in and out over, let's even say, a 7-day period number of times, it doesn't seem to be throwing out the data too much. And heat seems to be coming in good and strong. So that's promising. So I really don't think it's going to affect the ability to read or identify animals in heat for this breeding season.
Thank you very much. Martin, we talk about a calf crop of value, and we want a calf of value. We don't want a calf to be a byproduct of milk. So can we now get sex semen for beef?
Yeah, there is there's a couple of bulls that are, first of all, there's bulls being sexed for female sex sort for maternal, for say your 4-star maternal. So to get your heifers for replacement, and there's a couple of bulls. There's actually just an Angus bull gone on for sex now as a terminal sire. So we've a couple of Anguses, a couple of Limousin's that are coming through as terminal sires and sex male. Yeah.
Super, that's great to have them. Sex semen, I think you've given us all a bit more confidence with it, and I think, you know, the criteria of selecting the right cows. If we buy, or if we intend to use 30 sex semen straws, how many cows should we pull out for that, or have in our list for that?
Yeah, okay, so depending on your, if you're AM, PM, AI, you know, if you pick out your 35 cows, you're probably right. You know, if I'm only on once a day visit from an AI tech, I'll probably pick out 40% more cows, so that I know that up the crush I can still use my sex straws. That's probably where I am. So depending on your AI system. Yeah.
Super, thank you very much. And the last question, I suppose, is sex semen in markets like New Zealand. Is there any merit in? I know you very much go on a once a day here, because of the compactness of our season. But is there any merit in twice a day AIing with sex semen?
Research wise, no. Okay, so let's qualify it a bit. If I'm looking at AM, PM, and I'm selecting cows on the basis that they're ready AM, PM, fine, that's going to improve the situation. Is it if AI insemination once a day with conventional versus twice a day with conventional, there's no difference. Okay. There's no significant difference. Just a point there on the prostaglandin, just in case the synchronization bit was looked in a fixed time AI program with heifers, with prostaglandin being used on day 5. Again, probably with heifers, we're using that short time because we're picking up the CL that's present. We're also picking up the CL that's been encouraged by our GnRH shot. And we are recommend that second PG shot is making a huge difference to us on day 6, on the basis that we complete out the luteolysis, and also that later recruited CL that may be coming from day 2. So with heifers with the multiple waves, that 2 shots really works for us. And also it really avoids in the combination with P4, you're really avoiding the issue of heifers coming in heat before fixed time AI and creating confusion. In the older program with single shot PG, you were really looking at probably 30% of the heifers are actually on heat before fixed time AI and created a good bit of confusion. So just adding to what Eleanor was saying there. Okay.
Super. Thank you for clarifying that. We could stay here chatting all night, but I know everybody's tired and it's been a long day, but I'd like to congratulate everyone on their presentations. There was absolutely super information there. And on behalf of the audience, thank you very much for giving up your evening to impart some of that knowledge. So safe home. Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.